I'm sure you've all heard the truism that if an emergency allows the government to break the law, then there will always be an emergency, so they can always break the law. Well, there's a version of this in economics, where if an economic emergency can authorize the government to tax, manipulate, and spend, there will always be an economic emergency. When it comes to the extraction of wealth from the general populace through taxation, inflation, and interest rates, those in power will always seek to have additional reasons for doing what they are doing, without ever actually correcting the problems that they point to as justification for their theft and control. In many cases, it feels like the government and Fed are plague doctors. Just like during the plague, both the doctors and their victims pretend that the plague doctors have secret knowledge, granting them arcane solutions to their mundane problems. But as we know, plague doctors often did more harm than good and did not understand what they were dealing with. They made up bullshit explanations and cures that lined their pockets and kept them in business. If someone chose that line of work, there were only two possibilities. Either they believed their own line of BS and so were slow-witted, or they were smart enough to realize what they were doing wasn't helping and knew they were peddling snake oil. Medieval plague doctors' masks served a very important purpose. They insulated the doctors from the general population. They gave them anonymity and an air of superiority and mystery. The plague mask is a lot like the separation between most people and the ivory tower economists that the government and media turn to whenever they want to justify their pet projects. They are unapproachable, never appear when they can be challenged or their methodology can be called into question. This way, when their policies inevitably fail, nobody can say, "I told you so," because they aren't on record being challenged directly. There is an illusion that economics is so complicated, only highly advanced professors and career analysts can understand what's going on, but that is simply false. You need extreme expertise in order for a company or industry association to understand even the barest details of how a government policy will affect them specifically. While at the same time, it is incredibly simple to step back and see how a single decision will result in people moving to alternatives, adjusting to less regulated or taxed behaviors, and how a huge change in the money supply will affect inflation in broad strokes. The ability to understand economics is like an incredibly far-sighted person. The further away from the specifics you get, the easier it becomes to identify obvious flaws, while the closer you get to a specific issue, the harder it is to predict how every tiny change will affect your niche product or market. This is the reason why real economists like Austrian economists exist, because companies need to be able to plan for and survive the chaos. And since those companies are focused on their very specific industry, they need high-level experts to do extremely exhaustive analysis that will hopefully give their executives some small insight into what is coming. But as with plague doctors, people think that if there is a need for extreme experts at the small scale, that means the economist has an even greater insight into the broad scale. This is because the more you zoom out economically, the more alternatives, inputs, outputs, demand changes, and personal choices will come into play. While an expert may be able to give a relatively useful analysis on a single issue, the sheer volume of knowledge and understanding necessary to do a similar analysis across the entire economy becomes impossible. We call this the information problem, but really, it is also an expertise problem. It is literally impossible for a human or even a computer to account for all the desires of all the individuals in all the industries across all regions and sectors. Imagine a plague doctor who actually figured out how a specific disease spreads. They don't know why or how, they just have so much exposure and experience with that one disease that he stumbles onto a set of treatments that reduces the lethality of that disease. He doesn't know if it's one of his treatments or all of them together, but he keeps using the same routine because it works. That plague doctor doesn't understand germ theory or medicine as a whole. He doesn't understand all the individual diseases. He may claim to have arcane knowledge of humors and airs that will give him greater insight than peasants and kings alike, but like modern economists, his specific knowledge does not translate into broad understanding at the macro scale. Lastly, the plague doctor used protective measures to insulate them from the peasants they helped, not because they understood how to stay safe, but because they didn't want to touch the dirty rabble. They used canes so they wouldn't touch them, masks with flowers inside the nose so they wouldn't have to smell them. We should not kid ourselves. Modern economists have the same view of normal people. They think we are ignorant, unwashed peasants, only useful in how we affect GDP, the tax base, and carbon emissions. The core of both plague doctors and modern economists is fear. The people they supposedly serve are afraid. The fear of plague is just as real as the fear of losing your job or business drying up. One can die of starvation and poverty just as easily as from disease. When people are afraid or confused, they become willing to put their trust in men with masks and hopefully higher knowledge to save them. But we must remember that economists have no secret knowledge. There is nothing that magically makes printing money not result in inflation, or adjusting interest rates magically fix that inflation. At the highest level, economics becomes simple, and the formula to inflation is likewise simple. It is the number of dollars in circulation divided by the amount of economic activity chasing those dollars. It is what goes into these two factors that can become complicated. No matter how many subtleties you try to manipulate, however, there are many factors that cannot be nuanced away. Printing trillions of dollars is one of those factors. There is no subtle manipulation or arcane knowledge that will save you once you have caught the plague or doubled your money supply. At that point, you either survive or you don't, and your only hope is to stop making it worse. Raising the debt ceiling or printing money is tantamount to exposing a plague victim to another disease, hoping it will fight the first. But it doesn't take a medical degree to know that two diseases don't cancel out, and it doesn't take an economist to know that printing more money won't fix the economy. Now, I'm not saying all plague doctors were evil, and I'm not saying that all economists are evil, but both engage in the same charlatan behaviors that have the same incentives and motivations simply because they are human, and nothing has changed in 500 years between the two. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.